Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm Beth Bailey, and today I'm excited to welcome Patrick Wargo, a Navy veteran who spent nearly 7 years after leaving the service as a contractor in Afghanistan. Patrick has trained Afghan National Army Special Operations Command personnel, including the first woman ANASOC graduate who was a platoon commander in the female tactical platoons. Patrick was on the ground during retrograde operations and continued to volunteer to support Afghans he had become close with after leaving the country in June of 2021. Patrick, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm excited to hear more about your contracting journey.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us about how you got started in the world of contracting. What made you decide to go on over to Afghanistan?
So I got out of the Navy in 2013, and I was going to school for my degree in Bachelor's in Criminal Justice. Actually got into an argument with my ex-wife, and she went to her sister's house, and she was a recruiter for what used to be Blackwater, and then it became Sea Services Academy, all that. A couple of days later, I got a phone call from a recruiter asking if I wanted to go to Afghanistan. So of course I said yes. My ex-wife at the time said she didn't really want me to go. I was excited to go. So I went and said I would only do 1 year, and that turned into about 7.
So when you started, you weren't teaching. You started what was your role?
I was doing like force protection and security.
Okay.
I started out in Camp Dwyer down in Helmand Province, and then in HKIA in Kabul.
What year did you end up in Camp Dwyer? When was that?
That was 2015.
Okay, great. What was the operational tempo in Helmand like at that time?
It was pretty quiet at Dwyer at that time. There really wasn't much going on there. I didn't leave the base either. I was working static security, so I didn't really see too much at all. But it was a good foot in the door to get my way into the world of contracting, which it did.
Sure. So when did you shift over to training ANASOC personnel?
So in 2014, when I was doing force protection at HKIA, I met a few people over there, and they thought I'd be a good teacher for their ELT, which is the English language training program, and they were training Afghans, Air Force, and commandos English. Because I had a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, there's not many English teachers with a security clearance. I was able to get a certification from them to teach English as a second language. I wasn't they weren't writing essays and me grading papers. It was just learning so they could communicate with our soldiers to go out on missions and get stuff done together.
That's
incredible. That started in 2017. That was for a couple of years.
And so what was that shift like? Well, first let's go back. You were going to only be in Afghanistan for a year. And clearly you just kept working in Afghanistan. What was the draw for you?
I love the people and the experience. And that's kind of how I got the job, was just by they saw that how I treated the Afghans that were the ones that were the staff doing our laundry and cleaning, and I took care of them and gave them extra food and was just very nice to them and had them teach me their language and showed them a lot of respect. And that's kind of what caught the attention. And then they trained me to be a teacher. And once I started teaching them, I would get these students for 9 months at a time. So you really build that relationship, kind of like what you do with your American military counterparts. And just fell in love with it. I loved seeing things from a different perspective. I get so many funny stories of the cultural differences and where they're coming from and how it mixes with the way we see things. And it was really interesting to see things from their perspective.
Yeah, you're teaching them, but what do you think are the things that they taught you while you were their teacher?
They've taught me so much. That changed my life a lot for the better. They've taught me to be more appreciative. That whole experience, I'm more appreciative of everything. I live more in the present instead of worrying about regretting the past or what am I going to do in the future. So I don't take anything for granted. Empathy, appreciation for small things like having time with family. I remember one of the examples, they asked me what a neighbor was, and I explained to them what a neighbor is, the people that live next door to me. And they would ask me, like, what are their names? And I told them I didn't know. And they just thought that was the craziest thing. They're like, teacher, you should know all their names and everything. And I was just, you're kind of right. So I was like, but if I was broke down on the side of the road with a flat tire, they'd probably drive past me. They're like, that's not good, teacher. So,
It's so different. That must have
um,
been really interesting. What were some of the funnier moments that, the language difficulties?
okay. So in the beginning, because I was new, I was teaching the lower level. And in the beginning, it would be like, this is a table, this is a table, this is a table. And I'd ask one of the students, what is this? And they'd say yes. And I would do that again and just keep building on it for months. So it took a lot of patience. But I like to have fun with everything. And I always made it fun. And that kind of built the relationship. I had them teach me Dari at the end of the day so they could see me mispronouncing things and made them more comfortable and open up. One day I didn't come in for work because I was sick or something, and I came in the next day and there was a random keyboard hooked up to a TV. I think they were trying to watch movies while I was going, and I grabbed the keyboard and I was very upset because I was losing time. And I said, "What the fuck is this?" And they're like, "Keyboard!" All happy and proud. And I was like, "No." I said, "Dadakata fre," which is like, "Go take a break. Come back in 10 minutes." And I was laughing on the inside, but. There was a lot of moments like that. One day I came in and a student, it smelled really bad in that classroom. And I was like, what is that smell? And they're like, teacher, he has a fish. I'm like, what do you mean a fish? And one of the guys was boxing and he had a cast on. And they're like, he has a fish in there. I was like, why would he have a fish in there? I guess the village doctor or local doctor told them because it was sprained or broken to put a fish on there. He wrapped the cast around it and said, wear it for 48 hours, and then he'll take it off and try to readjust it and fix it. So I was like, you really have a fish in that cast? And he was like, yeah. I was like, don't come back until that fish is gone. It was just the summer of Afghanistan in a room with no AC. And so anytime they had a headache, they're like, teacher, I have a headache. Let's put a fish on it, just messing with them. So it was a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. And so these were all ANISOC operatives that, were going to go out and be the commandos that now, are in peril in their own country. How many of those of your former students do you know have made it to the U.S. or how many are still stuck in Afghanistan? Do you have any idea?
So I have about five that I was really close with because when they were my students or I worked with them at the school, eventually when I became the force protection mentor, they were also at that same base because I worked at ANISOC where they trained all their commandos. So that was their base. I worked around a lot of commandos and for years, and I knew a lot of them. Um, and I would say I like four out of my five very closest ones have made it to the States all over different periods of time. But even to this day, I get hundreds of emails and texts and Facebook messages, WhatsApp messages from people I don't know, or I might have been a student that I just don't remember because they weren't as close, always asking for help. And, obviously every August and September it gets a lot worse where I keep getting more messages. I would think some people would say, well, why don't you change your phone number or, just block them? But I never know if that's going to be if I don't want to ever miss a call or a message that could make the difference. So it's kind of still just dealing with that.
Have you been able to make any difference for any of them, or is it just kind of like being a listening voice at this point?
Uh, I've done as much paperwork and document collection as I can and did anything I possibly could. I don't know if any of it was the driving factor that helped, but I do have a few that have made it. I've gone to go visit them in Virginia, um, helped raise money to donate to them. I bought their son toys and an iPad so they could start learning. I took him to get his driver's permit and stuff of that nature. So I still do what I can. And then locally here in Tampa, I was working with a charity, and when they were first coming in, there weren't people that I know, but they were Afghans. Um, excuse me. I would go to take them to get haircuts because they have job interviews, or when they would get to their first house, I'd greet them with baskets of like stuff, like supplies and stuff. And they didn't know who I was or where I came from, and I have a binder with like all like 300 pictures I took when I was over there. And I speak a little bit of Dari with Pashto. I probably mixed them together without realizing it. But they kind of got the idea. Like I would show up, like this American guy just showing up in this country, and then start speaking to them in Dari and Pashto and showing them pictures. And you could just see like how much more comfortable they felt like having somebody that understood where they're coming from.
That's really incredible. I can't imagine what it would feel like to come here and be so fish out of water, not fishing cast.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, to have somebody who has taken the time to learn their language and who can show them that,
No.
here's how I connect to your country. That must feel so calming in the midst of that big storm. But the other thing is that, these operatives who've made it here, I'd love to know how they made it here, because that's one of the groups that doesn't qualify for SIV status, special immigrant visa status, for anybody who's listening and doesn't know that acronym right now, along with another group that I mentioned earlier, the female tactical platoons, also don't qualify. Special mission wing don't qualify. And these are people who worked so closely with contractors like you, Patrick, with our military personnel, and they're still in Afghanistan, and so many of them are in incredible danger. And I'd like to ask you about the woman who went through training, who was that platoon commander with the female tactical platoon. So she was the first person to go through training with you. Is that correct?
For English, yeah.
Okay.
So
and tell us about the story.
So at that time, I was the lead of the English program, and we were coming up on where we needed to recruit our next class of students for another semester. And she arrived and took the pretest, and she scored so high on the pretest that she could have graduated without even taking the class. So the Afghan leadership there, they didn't want to send her back to her unit. They wanted to keep her and have her work admin role, which I don't know if they were going to try to make her just serve tea for 9 months and send her back. I don't know if that was what they intended. So I convinced them that this would be good for their command, their country, and definitely for women to let her enroll, because it was all males. And in the beginning, you could see like the males would take, like, if she had the good chair, they would try to give her the crappier chair. But we made sure, like, no, give that back, treat her the same. She's one of you, stuff like that. So she stuck through the course for 9 months. She smoked it. Out of about 110 Commando English students, she was number 2. She scored number 2. And I knew she was obviously in ANOSOC and Commando, but I didn't know that she was the platoon commander of that all-female platoon that I found out about recently because of the news and the attention she's got since she's made it to the United States. But yeah, she was really smart. So if we ever had trouble teaching other students, she would come in and we'd have her teach them. And it was just a couple of weeks ago, I was at work, where I work now, and I saw on TV, and she's on the news in the United States talking to Congress and about was it the Afghan Adjustment Act, and trying to help in that process. And I just keep seeing news articles, and it was a really good feeling to see that. So I found her on LinkedIn. I messaged her. She still calls me teacher. so it's a good feeling. But
That's amazing. That's that. Yeah, I can't get some of the Afghans that I'm closest to. I try to tell them, please don't call me ma'am. You don't have to call me ma'am. And they're like, no,
yeah.
that's an important part of our culture. You are ma'am. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
I,
You can just,
I,
that's,
I
don't
barely ever heard my name for years. They just went by teacher for like so long. It was like before every sentence they started it with it, and I couldn't sweep my classroom or carry books. Like their students were like, "No, you're the teacher." Like they had such respect for teachers. I couldn't imagine like trying to teach here in the United States after teaching there. The gratitude and the way they treat you. So
Yeah, I think that's one thing we lose about Afghan culture. I think that in like the 20 years of war that we had in Afghanistan, what we heard at home was about, graft and corruption, or, all these things. And in reality, Afghan culture is a really unique and beautiful thing. I think Michael and I have said it before, like, you can get contact from an Afghan who has the Taliban at their door, or who is actively in peril, and the first thing they're going to ask you is, how are you doing? It's
yeah,
like, no. Let's deal with the raging dumpster fire that's going on in your life right now. Like, I'm fine.
yeah.
They're just, the
And
kindest and
that's
most
always how
open
I try
people.
to treat it. Like I want to help them because I know if I was stuck over there and say I didn't get evacuated, that they would take me in and protect me and be hospital and do that. So, and I feel like that's the majority of them. That's how it is. So
Mhm.
that's why I love trying to give back and do that. It's just changed the way that I appreciate things because of them.
I think that's amazing because you hear so many sad stories of things that have come out of the withdrawal, and it's really great to hear about the positives. Like I say the same thing. I think being involved in the withdrawal has definitely it's changed my life completely, and it has made me much more grateful for the small things that I have. And I'd say Afghanistan has given me far more than it has taken from me. The new lease on life
So
that I think I have as a result of all this, and the camaraderie I feel with people who, like you know, care so much. It's a unique brand of people who've gotten into this field, and I think that yeah, once you get involved in Afghanistan, that's you're going to be
yeah,
involved
yeah,
for
and
some
I mean,
time.
when you're on active duty, you go on deployment for 12 months or 14 months or whatever, and then you come back. But as a contractor, you stay there for the whole time. Like I would only come home 30 days a year, and you were like the continuity between the deployments of the different units. So it was nice when the military recognized that because then you were a very useful tool because they already have these relationships. You know, the new command comes in, they see that you have those relationships, understand how they reacted to situations in the past, and you're that continuity. So,
God,
um,
yes. That is so important. Having seen that, you know, with from my old role as an intel analyst, you know, you do see how, you know, those shifts can be difficult. But yeah, the continuity is incredibly important. What about when retrograde operations started? How did your role shift at that point?
so I remember so what was it, 2020, like around February, when they said that we would start withdrawing a year prior, I believe. And I think it was supposed to be what in May. May of 2021. They said that we were supposed to be out of there. I believe I was home. I actually happened to be home on PTO, and that's when COVID hit. Um, so I worked at Camp Moorhead for like 4 years. So I was really close to the people there. After COVID died down, uh, I was sent back, but not to Moorhead. That's when I went to SMW, and that was about January of 2021, and I remember getting back on the ground in January 21, and there was less troops there, less contractors. There was already you could see that there was less personnel there, and I remember especially the active duty guys. They are just working around the clock. Nobody knew what to prepare for because the election was up in the air. We didn't know who was the president, what was going to happen. So it was a lot of prepare for every option possible. So it was a lot of hard work and planning for both ends. But it was really good to see as that time went on, everybody working together, people working outside their scopes of work. It really brought out the best in people. Like I know a lot of bad things happened in the end, and I feel like that overshadows all the good things that were done leading up to that point before. Everybody just working outside their jobs, helping each other where they can. I mean, contractors doing stuff with active duty, whatever we had to do to get stuff done. And that's part of what I really miss about working overseas. So,
What kind of stuff was getting done? I mean, I this is part of the whole, you know, pre-withdrawal period that I certainly have not heard about as much, and I'm definitely intrigued to know what was getting done in those months, what was being prepared for, you know, who.
so I would say like trying to figure out what stuff was getting sent home first, what order of things, what was most important that needed to get done first, equipment wise and stuff like that. Uh, how we were going to transfer uh, authority to the Afghans and responsibility. That was a huge part of it. Let's see what else. Just coming up with a plan for anything. So I left there in about June, yeah, June of 2021. So they still wanted me to advise or work from home. So I could only do so much calling from here. And the security commander is telling me he wants to ask MOD for RPGs and stuff. I can't really do nothing from home, but just report stuff. But yeah, retrograde. It was just I just remember the people working so hard, um, a lot.
Did you see any preparations for the Neo that was eventually going to happen, or was that kind of not underway?
Yeah, so I wasn't like as far as like when you talk about like when the Marines started coming in towards the end or the evacuation part.
Or just any, yeah, like I don't think there was any preparation for the Neo as of, June of 21, right? There were no.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Not that I know of. I mean, that's also a lot of that's above my pay grade. Uh, but the transfer of resources was kind of like I left during the middle of that, trying to figure out what we're going to leave. And of course, the Afghans are asking for this. Oh, are you going to leave this? It was like Christmas time to them, trying to figure out what they're going to get and what got left behind. And where I work, I think the big concern was Afghans were not able to do their own maintenance on their aircraft, and the pilots did not want to fly that aircraft without contractors being there to help support. And I think that while I was there, that was a huge issue. I was trying to
Sure.
figure out how that was going to go because I think there was talks of plans of maybe working over the horizon and trying to do something else of that nature to try to assist from somewhere else. But yeah, that's above my pay grade there.
Did you have the sense that, were you concerned that maybe the Afghan military was not going to be able to hold its own against the Taliban at that point, or were you pretty.
No, I
No.
I did not think it would happen that fast. I thought I, personally, I thought maybe like 2 3 months, but I did not have that much confidence just because you could see that things were falling apart, and once we were gone, it was just going to fall even further, unfortunately. So it was a very sad situation to you're kind of just hoping for the best, preparing for the worst.
Sure. What, so when you got back to the States, you said you were still doing support from home. And you mentioned, like, oh, can you send RPGs to whomever? And, like, obviously that wasn't possible. But what other things could you do that were supporting those operations?
For that, it was just me more getting information from the security commander that I advised because he was in charge of the force protection at that area. So he would just report to me what's going on, and then I'd have to report that back to my supervisors and talking to different contractors over there and trying to facilitate logistical stuff and get everybody on the same page. Calling one guy to call another guy to relay messages and get them to work together. There wasn't too much I could do from home. It was really frustrating. Like I would have much rather been over there than have been home. So to kind of watch that unfold from home was very extremely frustrating. So.
Sure. But the rationale for moving you in June of 21 was then to make it easier when they needed to do the full evacuation. Is that accurate, or was there a different reason for pulling you back to the States?
Um, Yeah, I knew I wasn't going to be there for that evacuation in
Mm-hmm.
August, September. Um, they needed to get certain contractors out of there, and yeah, I knew I wasn't going to be there. There was hopes that maybe we would go over the horizon and try to establish being able to work in another capacity and still communicate. But obviously, once the Afghan president was on a plane, when I woke up in the morning, the Afghan president was on the plane. I knew it was time. I'm going to have to look for a job.
So that was
So
the point for you. Like
yeah, that was
when,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
gosh.
I mean, even then, I still stayed on the phone around the clock and tried to do whatever I could. But when that happened, yeah, I kind of knew it was over.
What kinds of things, so yeah, let's talk about that shift. August 15th happens, the Taliban take over Kabul. Were you still working in your contractor capacity? Were you doing more like, trying to clean up fires as people reached out to you for individual help? Was it a combination? What was that like?
So my contract was actually ending September 30th, so it was right after that. So I mean, yeah, I was still my job was still there for a week, but there was nothing we could do. But even after that, yeah, I was kind of solo on my own, trying to do whatever I could, and but that shifted towards just trying to help the people that I know. Obviously, I didn't have any influence on what was going on military wise. It was just getting documents from the Afghans, trying to figure out the SIV process. There were so many different rumors. I feel like talking to so many different people from so many different places, you don't know if you're getting fed old information and then you forward them old information or which one was correct. That whole process was extremely frustrating. So
Sure.
I feel like there should have been better preparation for that, and I think that was a huge failure on that end.
Yeah. So were people like at Abbey Gate or at North Gate or at, HKIA, like trying to get you to help them with their packets of information for, is
Yeah,
that?
that's exactly what it was. It was a lot of the people that I knew. They were at Abbey Gate, hoping to contact me, and then I'd be able to contact somebody to get them in. But I didn't have that much contact with the military. There's a couple of people that I still knew over there that I worked with, but I tried not to bother them because they had a lot on their plate at that time, and they weren't thinking about me. I know that when they were in the middle of that. So, so I just collected everything, filled out all these forms, spent hours every day, and then with the time difference, I didn't get any sleep, but I would not miss a phone call or a text because if I would have missed one, that could have been a difference. I never would have been able to live with that, knowing that I missed a text or a phone call because I was sleeping and somebody didn't get out.
Did anybody that you were in contact with get out through HKIA?
Yeah, well, when my interpreter got out, him, his wife, and his son, they were already on in the process of, even when I was still there working, he was so far along in the process that I actually thought he'd get to the United States before me anyway. So it was kind of easy for him. And I was talking to him every day. He was on one of the planes that was taken off as they were getting overrun, as they were taking Kabul. So I lost communication with him for about 24 hours, and that's when I was really worried about what would happen. And then eventually he made it to another country, called me. I was so happy to find out that him and his family made it. They eventually made it to Virginia. And then one of the Afghan majors that I was mentoring, I called one of the guys from the army that I worked with to ask him. He told me that he was killed. So I thought he was dead. And then a week later, his phone's calling me. I'm getting a phone call from somebody I thought was dead, and turns to find out he was alive. And he ended up making it to like Uzbekistan or I forget where, one of the other countries out there. But yeah, so there's a couple of people I know that did get out. I don't know how they did. They'll always say, "Oh, thank you, sir. It was because of you," but I don't think it was because of me. I think they just had other connections and they just showing gratitude. So, but I'm just happy they made it. But when they get home, I mean, when they get here, it's a whole nother challenge. Like, I thought it'd be great when they got here. It'd be like a huge relief, but it's just a different stress. Like, now, okay, you made it here, but now you have to pay bills. You got to figure out how to drive, get your kids in school. I had to tell my interpreter with a car seat. I was like, look, you got to have a car seat. You can't just throw your kid on the front seat and drive them around. So you can't ride in the back of the trunk with it open. You can't put people in the trunk. So
Oh, Lord.
it's a cultural adjustment. So I had to explain to them what the car insurance is. How do you explain car insurance to them? Like, so
Yeah, I was just at the home of former interpreter, and I've been talking to all these refugee resettlement people this summer for some articles, and that you hear that anyone who's in the process is supposed to receive all these benefits, but they're not getting any benefits. The benefit that they're getting is not living under the Taliban, which is a great
yeah,
benefit,
right.
but it's still, it's okay. I saw their children were so happy, and I thought my heart was going to explode. So that was great in and of itself. But yeah, I mean, the small things that for us even are kind of inconveniences, like swapping your electric bill to a new address, for
Yeah,
instance, for someone who doesn't know that system and has lost the support of whatever refugee resettlement group got them into here because, oh, we helped you for a year and now you're on your own. Like, that becomes a big hurdle. Or learning the language because, the interpreter might have known the language, but his wife is still struggling to acquire it. Like, there are just a lot of hurdles
yeah,
still to come. And I don't think that we've made the effort to, you have gone and reached out to Afghans, but I think as a society, we haven't really been as welcoming as we should have been.
no, I agree. And that's the situation that my interpreter came across. His wife didn't speak English. I saved a bunch of the English materials from when I was teaching, so put them on little thumb drives, and I was handing them out to Afghans while I was still in Afghanistan before I left. I was like, here, take these, in case you need it one day, you'll have it. So I did that. But even their 3-year-old son, he had trouble like finding friends because he's a little kid and nobody speaks his language. He doesn't speak English, so he doesn't, and that's another thing. Afghans are very big on their family living together, like grandparents, cousins. They asked me like, teacher, does your mother-in-law live with you? And I was like, no, she lives like 5 minutes down the road. That's close enough. They're like, no, they should all live. You should all live together, and everybody like, it's just so. And then they come here, and a 3-year-old little boy just doesn't have any friends or any other families. They're kind of like they feel stuck inside their apartment. So I can only imagine if you were in Afghanistan and you had to figure out how to survive and you didn't speak any Dari or Pashto or
it would be so hard. And it hurts my heart to know that. Yeah, I mean, this whole podcast, I've told this story on the podcast before, but this whole podcast exists because a former neighbor told me that he didn't think that any Afghans should be in our country, even if they served with us, even if they worked with us. And I was so disgusted by that I said, Michael, we got to do this because we have to shift the narrative here and let people see what a difference.
And that reminds me, like when I was driving a couple Afghans here, there was a barber shop giving free haircuts to Afghans that were going to job interviews. So I picked up a car full of them. I drove them out there. And one of the guys, he recognized me from before because I greeted him when he got here. He knew my story, and I knew he worked at whatever base or whatnot. And he was like, sir, he's like, Afghanistan, 20 million people, maybe 50,000 are Taliban or whatever number. And he's like, but why here does everybody think that I'm a Taliban? And I was like, I tried to warn my guys of that kind of situation, that not everybody's going to be very welcoming, and you guys are very open and hospitable. So, and I was worried about that. That was one of the big things that I tried to warn them about. It's not going to be what you think when you get here. And that kind of just broke my heart because I knew that was going to happen.
Yep. And because this was such an abhorrent failure, the withdrawal, a lot of people blamed the Afghan military and said that, oh, well, they didn't try hard. They didn't do, and they don't understand the full extent of how difficult it was, which is why I think you're telling the story of, already seeing the cracks in anyone being able to hold up underneath losing your contractor workforce that enables your job and not being able to get things like RPGs because you're not in country to, to help that process like that. It's not
I couldn't get the
guy
will. I couldn't get him RPGs anyway. I was just using that example. He would just ask for something.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, I talked to one former pilot, and he said, yeah, by the time that the U.S. was gone, like I think it was probably by the time that the Taliban took over, they didn't have any more, I forget, he called them bombs, I want to say, but for his aircraft. So how were they supposed to support troops without anything to rain down on the Taliban? And
Yeah, and that's why SMW was Special Mission Wing was supposed to be very important in that situation. So, no.
Yeah, but it's not fair to Afghans who worked faithfully with us, who they do not deserve to be painted as Taliban or as
right.
Not having tried hard enough when they did a very brave thing supporting us.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them, they did put their lives on the line. And I feel like from being there so long, you could tell you could realize that some of them were just hoping you'd build relationships, and some people you could tell they're trying to get something out of it, and then you can tell the ones that were actually genuine, trying to help and did care. So. I think about it all day, every day. It just never stops. It's always on my mind. So
I can understand that. I'm glad you're doing something about it, and I hope that helps in some way to process that. I wanted to ask you about the dogs too. So when we were talking before this, you helped save some dogs who were left behind. Can you tell the story to our listeners?
So yeah, when I was at Camp Moorhead or Camp Commando up in the mountains, there was a lot of wild dogs just running around, and eventually they would put poison in food and leave them out because you don't want wild dogs biting soldiers, and then you're down personnel. And so the dogs were, it was like our enjoyment every day just to see some dogs. Because there was one dog, she just kept getting pregnant and having puppies over and over and over again. So like we watched these little puppies grow up and become the dogs around there. So everybody kind of got attached to them. So we worked together with shelters out in Kabul. Uh, they would pick the dogs up. They couldn't keep them because there wasn't enough room. So they would get them fixed for us and bring them back so they can't reproduce and stuff like that. Get them shots, and then eventually, like the soldiers that were on active duty there, they'd grow attached to some of these dogs that were there on their deployment. And obviously they can't take the dogs back. They cost like to ship one back was like $3,000 or $4,000, and um, so we'd either all chip in or raise money for them. And then we found out that because we were contractors and we fly commercial out of Kabul airport, that if the Afghan shelter picks up the dog, keeps them there, we donate money to the shelter. The shelter would meet us at the airport with all the vaccination records and everything. And so me and a couple other contractors were taking dogs back to the United States and meeting a soldier who's in Afghanistan. Family would be there to pick him up. And when that guy would get home for deployment, that dog would probably be like, "What are you doing here?" Coming back to this dog. So I had two dogs that I was originally going to keep. I was originally supposed to be one, but I I asked somebody to watch them for me. This woman, older lady, volunteered to watch them for me while I was finishing up over there. And so I dropped these two big dogs off, and they were like golden shepherd. And these dogs have never been in a car. They've never been in a building. So they just flew on an airplane. They just peed and threw up all over themselves. They'd never been on a leash. And I have to, like, I flew 24 hours with like a 1 hour layover in Turkey. Like, I tried to make it as quick as possible for the dogs. And so I had to like leave one in the car, carry one into the hotel, put him in the room, hope he wasn't going to tear nothing up, go out, pick the other one up, carry that one in. So then I took him to the vet. I took him to get bathed, and I dropped him off at the woman's house, and she's gonna watch him. And like 4 days later, I get a phone call, and her daughter's like, "Hey, your dogs, they killed my mom's cat." I was like, "Your mom didn't tell me she had a cat. Why didn't she tell me she had a cat?" Like she's like, "Well, our cat got along with our dog previously." I was like, "Yeah, but these are wild dogs from Afghanistan." So. Luckily, she understood that it was a mistake to not have the cat there. So she continued to watch those dogs for probably about a year. And because in true contractor form, this was going to be my last year in Afghanistan. And then another opportunity arose where I moved up. Um, so I had to find somebody to watch them. They ended up going to two retired, like Marine vets. They had to be separated because they were sisters. They did not get along. I had to buy her. I bought her new furniture. Took care
Oh
of
my
her.
goodness.
I got this dog's trained, a dog psychiatrist, because I was just like doing anything I could because I felt bad for this poor woman. I'm in Afghanistan, and she tried to do something nice, but it all worked out in the end. But it was like it was an interesting story.
Oh wow. Well, and it's you get into it, and I feel like it's really hard to get out of the contracting world once you've gotten into it. I was
Yes.
friends with a lot of contractors when I was in my previous
Oh,
life, and it was just important work, and most people I
yeah.
don't think know about how much of what went on in Afghanistan was done by a contracting workforce.
I'm so bored right now. I would be over there right now if I could be, you know, especially now
Yeah.
that my wife supports it. But yeah, but yeah, it's hard. It was hard to walk away from. If it wasn't for the withdrawal, I'd still probably would have been there, maybe.
Yeah,
So
that would be my last question for you is, how has it felt because you did put so much of your life into helping Afghanistan improve and creating this space for democracy to take hold. And what was it like for you for the last 2 years to watch the Taliban, reverse all that progress?
it's very frustrating. And I always thought I was like, oh, if we leave, we're gonna have to go back there in a couple of years, and I'm hoping that's not what happens. But even while we were in retrograde, I had a feeling I was like, we're gonna come back here in like 4 to 5 years and have to do something. And I hope not. You hope for the best, but we'll see. It's all the work that went into it and that relationship building. And you had 20 years of Afghans that grew up um, conforming or agreeing with our ideas and the way of life. And now that's going to be taken away, and we're going to be looked at as the bad guys, you know. So, and then all the little kids that are growing up now are going to grow up, you know, under Taliban rule, and they're going to hate us and hate our way of life. Or, you know, we're going to lose that progress. So,
Yeah, especially I see it for women.
for
I'm
women,
so
yeah.
glad that the woman that you advocated for to be in your classes and not serving tea, that she's here.
Hmm.
But there are so many women like her who are
No.
still stuck and just, ugh.
Yeah, I remember it was during like my last couple of days there, and I remember like the day before recently they blew up like an all girls school. There was like I don't know how many died or something like that. And one of my Afghan soldiers came in and he had his little daughter in a little commando out uniform. And I was leaving in a couple of days, and she was like the most adorable looking kid. And I don't like holding other people's kids, and I'm just not like that. But I just looked at her and man, I just felt so bad. Like, and I still picture that kid, that little girl, vividly, you know. And I'm just thinking, man, I feel bad for what's coming for them.
Yep, it's heartbreaking, but it's great to know that, so much passion and energy went into that, and it doesn't negate any of it. Those feelings are still there in the population. They're just currently being repressed, and
No,
I just hope that the Taliban do themselves in before long.
I hope so.
Democracy can return for all these women. And actually, today's episode we have some stories now from listeners in Afghanistan, and Michael and I always like to close with some of those. Today's story is from a young woman, a 16-year-old girl we're calling Hamida, and she wrote to us about how her family members have been imprisoned because she refused to marry an older man per the Taliban's demands. So this is Hamida's story in her own words. I am Hamida, 16 years old. I am from Farah province, an Afghan girl. I want to tell my story as below. In the last few months, the Taliban attacked our house several times, harassed and attacked my father and my brother. They beat my father with their weapons and imprisoned him for 20 days. They want to forcibly marry me to an old man. They are harassing us in different ways so that we are forced to be agreed, but neither I nor my family is agreed. I do not want this illegal and underage wedding to take place. After 2 months, they were harassing my family a lot, and I had to run away from my home in Farah and take refuge in the house of my relatives who were in Kandahar. Then the Taliban put my father, my mother, and my 8-year-old brother in prison without any crime, and they said that they will not leave until Hamida comes here. Now my life and my family's lives are in heavy danger. I don't want to marry a 70-year-old man by force. I have the right to choose my own future, and I will not accept an underage or illegal marriage in any way. But unfortunately, in Afghanistan, no one hears the voice of a woman. That's why I'm asking you, very helplessly and oppressed, to secure my rights and save me from this hell of Afghanistan to live peacefully and protected in your country. Thank you, your oppressed sister, Hamida. I'm so grateful to Hamida for letting me tell her story, and I certainly hope that she's going to be able to escape forced marriage, because I cannot imagine the horror of that experience. Again, to all of our listeners in Afghanistan, we'd love to hear your stories and share them on the podcast. Tell us about, your experience during nearly 20 years of war, or after the Taliban came to power, or during the actual withdrawal. Whatever you want to share, we'd like to hear it, and you can send that correspondence to our show address, which is the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Patrick, I want to thank you again for just talking about your work in Afghanistan, your love of the Afghan people, and, how far-reaching the impact of our withdrawal has been. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk. I love being able to talk about it.
Yeah, it's always good to talk about Afghanistan, I find, obviously. I'd like to also thank our listeners for sharing their time and supporting the people of Afghanistan. So Tashakur, and we hope to see you again soon.